west, they're building the railroad to California, but there's also north and south railroads that got a lot of granted a lot of land. So now you have the cattlemen had the opportunity to move the cattle to a common location where you put them on the rails. Chicago was the center for all that beef processing. Refrigeration was not around yet, so the animals, I'll talk about this in a little bit, but the animals had to be moved up on foot because there's no refrigeration until the animals. You have to preserve them somehow. So most of it was moved on foot. And then most of the cattle packing companies were in Chicago, but then they developed these satellite branches, and that's where all those other stockyards, Kansas City, Denver, etc. And so that's part of that. So here's the migration, or I should say the development of the beef industry from 1850 to 1900. So you can see each dot on the map represents 2,000 head. So you can see that the population was really eastern Texas. And then here you see, this is the land grants from the government to the railroads. So they had incredible amount of land grants to them. And that made the pathways to get from the big ranches to the railways to the stockyards. And then you see how the migration changed over whatever 60 years. There's a lot more in the Midwest there. And even today, when you look at the numbers, I was surprised that what I saw the other day was Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri were the biggest cattle populations in the United States, which I was surprised at. I thought, not Montana and Wyoming would have a lot more than they do. This book, this book here is really interesting. I bought it several years ago, and I used a lot of it, or used it as reference for a lot of this material. He talks about the industry from, I think it's 1850 to 1920, but here's a doctor, I think he's at Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma. And it's a really good book that documents the whole development of the industry. I only focused on like the Midwest part, but he talks about development up in the far west and the southwest as well. And a very good reference. So what happened in over time is these companies. There were 6 major companies that were doing beef processing in the United States, and they formed a non-compete trust, so they wouldn't compete each other. And what that did was gave them a monopoly on the industry. And so they were able to control the price that they paid the producer, because they were one, right? So they could say, this is what we're going to pay for your cattle by the head. They control the quality of the animals, how the animals are shipped, the welfare of the animals, everything. And then on the backside, they can control, because they're controlling the processing market, they can control how much meat was actually getting out there and manipulate the price of the beef going to the consumer. And so it became a big problem. This cartoon I found online was from like 1904, I think. I think Puck was in the New York Times. But this is the beef trust here, and here, I don't know if you can see it, but here they had bomb sausage, deodorized ham, poison, potted poison, chemical. People were getting sick from the meat that was being processed because of the quality controls. The quality was not regulated by anybody in the industry. And I guess at some point somebody has to be in charge. And so the other problem, logistic problems that they had in the industry, that although they may have been manipulating things, there was issues that they had to deal with, like there's no refrigeration, so we got to pay to move these cattle from wherever we picked them up from to some place, feed them the whole time until they're processed, And a lot of times, like if they were in Chicago, they have to go to move to New York or the Northeast or DC, wherever they were going before they were processed. So they had to keep these animals alive during that period of time. So there's a bunch of issues that they had to deal with at the time. When we deal with it today, we have modern technology that takes care of it for us, but they didn't have that. So that contributed to the issue. So what happened was, this is in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This guy up in St. Clair went into the industry in Chicago and lived and worked in there for several months. And he came out and he wrote a novel about the conditions in the industry. And the public was horrified. And it was an international bestseller. Now, before I did the research for this, I've never heard of it. So it's something that's out there, but I had never heard of it. And it's so far, it's over 100 years ago now. But at the time, it was a big deal. The other big factor at this time was during the Spanish-American War, the government had a contract with the meat companies to send beef to the soldiers that were in the Spanish-American War, and they sent a bunch of beef down there, and they said that it tasted and smelled like embalming fluid, like they had embalmed the meat to preserve it. And they got hundreds of them got sick, many died, and it was a big scandal at the time. And so between the jungle and this other scandal that's fresh in the public's mind, there's out. And so at that point, Congress stepped in and put together this Meat Inspection Act of 1906, signed into law by Theodore Roosevelt, who experienced firsthand there because he was part of the Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War. So what that led to was it gave the USDA authority to inspect meat. And so even today, USDA doesn't inspect all our meat. You can go to a family processor and get meat that's not inspected, but it gave them the authority for their contracts to inspect all their meat. And so for the public, that extended into other large consumers, retailers, railroads, shipping at the time that were contracting for beef to point to this inspection and say, we want this, and it gave the consumers confidence that the beef that they were getting had value, that there was at least some quality controls regulated by the government to make sure they were getting quality. And then that extended to farm products, and really it resulted in improvement across the industry for the workers' living conditions, the conditions of the animals, how they were treated from purchase to process, and the conditions of the meat processing. There was some regulation. These links here will take you to, if you want to study that or have more interest in any of that, provided those links.
Yeah.
You want to go further? It's 11:30.
11:30.
Lunch is at noon, so we can pause and take a break if this is a good stopping spot for you. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
What's everybody think? Want to keep going?
Yeah.
Get this over with?
Keep going.
All right, so we got to the point now where we have inspections. They're routinely inspecting meat, and the public is getting meat that there's some level of confidence that you get a quality product. The government is relatively satisfied with what they're getting. But there is questions, just like we're going to talk about terms, there's questions about terms of the quality of it. And so this is where grading comes in. If we go to the next slide. So in the 1920s, what they found was the government was contracting to these beef enterprises to give them so many tons of beef. And with some expectation that it's gonna have certain level of quality, and they were getting beef that did not have the quality that they were expecting, and so it was lost in, the communication was lost in terms. You said one thing, that's something else to someone else, and so they could deliver less quality than expected to the customer, and then the customer would be dissatisfied, but they could say, we met the requirement of the contract. And so, oh, yeah, you couldn't blow it up. So that was the problem. It wasn't just the government that was having this problem, the other industries were as well. So it was a common problem across the board. So USDA, I think it was 1923, yeah, came out with this market classes and grades of beef, terms and definitions. And they started applying it in 1924. It was applied to the industry, and the USDA could assign those market grades. So what did that lead to? Now the consumer had more confidence when they went to buy meat, when they went to the store, and it said, even today, when you go to the store and you look at the meat on the shelf, a lot of, like, you go to Walmart, you'll see choice. And so you, to a certain extent, you have confidence that you know that's a good piece of meat. Did I know all the different grades of meat quality at the time? No, but when I look at that, I see that label from the USDA that says this is inspected and it's choice. I think, oh, that's a good piece of meat. So it gave the public confidence in what they were buying. And then it led to market opportunities, because if you could say, my animals, based on my genetics, are yielding a certain amount of retail cuts compared to their carcass weight more than others, it's a percentage, and we'll get into it, but if you could say that, you could argue that your carcass is worth more than other carcasses that are on the rail. Same with quality. If you could show that, hey, my beef is great in prime, it's worth more than choice, select, or standard. And so those became things that you could use as market opportunities to market the quality of your beef. And so this program was implemented in 1924, and it's still in place today. It's been tuned, and to me, what I looked at, it looks like a pretty robust program. Link, if you want to. So there's two types of grade types. There's yield grade and quality grade. So yield is what I just talked about. How much does my animal yield? How many retail cuts do I get from any carcass? What's the percentage? And these are the traits that they look for, and they think that's yield grade. And then the quality grade is based on maturity and marbling, which is, but we'll talk about. Then there's two types of estimating or predicting about the quality of the quality and the yield of the carcass. You can use ultrasound or carcass on the round. And so all ultrasound is done by an ultrasound technician. That this is where the stock show data comes from, or bull test. And then the carcass grading on the rail. I haven't found any data related to the Highland about carcasses on the rail. So I don't think, has anybody in here that does beef had their beef graded?
Interesting.
Anybody had it inspected? Yeah, so a few people got inspected. When I talked to my meat processor about it, they just kind of, their eyes glazed over. They're like, we do inspection, but we don't do grading. So I think it's something you have to find where they do it. Now in the big processing plants, probably like Swift, they're going to have graders in there because Walmart is going in there with a contract for so many tons of choice, and they're getting it. So they have people in there grading, but for the family processor, I don't think they're going to get it. So I think it's something to explore, which I intend to do, but the ultrasound data will still give you information. And so here's some examples of how they do the ultrasound and how they look at the carcasses on the ring. So we'll talk about yield grading. These are the 5 factors that go into determining how much yield you're going to get. So our carcass weight is the weight of the animal as it's hanging before it goes in the cooler. So hugs removed, skins removed, heads removed, and it's a hanging carcass. kPH fat is kidney, pelvic, and heart fat. Percentage of that around the on the carcass, and it's estimated by the grader. Back cover, the ribeye area size, and then we'll talk about yield rates. So here, 1200 to 768 is usually referred to as the dressing percentage or something about dressing. But that is not your yield. So one of the things I think this is my thoughts, in our breed, I believe we probably have heavier hides. And I believe we probably have heavier heads. So that number there, 64%, may not be reflective of our breed. I don't know. I've never seen any data. There's not enough data that I've seen to tell me. But what I believe is when we get to here, we should be getting high yield. And so I'm not, for me personally, I'm not too concerned. I don't want a 15 or 1800 pound steer, but I'm not too concerned about this number to this number. If we go to the words. So the hog carcass weight is that we just talked about that. And usually the number will be on the carcass as it's hanging for how many ever days you're hanging. The kPH estimate by the USDA grader. Most carcasses are going to have 1 to 4% kPH. It's the last factor that's considered when they're doing the yield grade. These are terms, right now we're talking about terms of yield. So hog carcass weight and kidney, pelvic, and heart is the first two that we talked about. This is where they make those estimates on the carcass. It's not a great picture, but it's the only one I can find. Okay, now we're going to talk about back fat. The back fat is a critical determiner of the yield grade of this carcass. It's measured between 12 and 13th rib. It's usually 0.2 to 0.4 inches, and it's used to determine the primary yield grade, which is shown here. So depending on what you measure, that's your yield grade. The objective is to get that yield grade to as low a number, as close to 1 as possible.
Oh, okay.
So you see when you have zero ribeye fat, you're at 2. So you've got a high yield animal, but there's other factors that go into say how good yield you're going to get, which we just stuff from. Here's how they measure the back fat. So that shows you kind of where they're measuring it. That shows you where they're measuring on the carcass. And then this shows you how they do it on the carcass when it's hanging. Obviously, you won't do that. So they'll get that number, and that will tell them the primary yield grade. Links. Okay, ribeye area. This is one that's important. So it's measured again between 12 and 13th rib. 12 to 15 inches is the recommended USDA size for the best dining standards. And it significantly will contribute to the yield. This is a picture of how they do it on a carcass. They have this sheet these blocks, and you can count the number of blocks and figure out how many inches there. And I guess they use something similar to that, like to that for measuring marble. And the white up there, 2 recommendations. Kind of tricky, at least I didn't, it tricked me until I thought about it. The REA target should be approximately 1.6 to 1.8 square inches per 100 pounds surface weight. When you look at our data, we're getting at least on animals that are ready to go to market, we're getting that on hoof. And then the other thing is the 12 to 15 inches per 100 pounds, or I think. Okay, so the yield grade is the indication of cutability, the yield of boneless retail cuts. So what you're putting in your car to bring home, or truck to bring home from the processor compared to what the animal hung. And it's a predicted value. It's not actual value. Actual value is important, but it depends on your cutting instructions. So if you're cutting out all the bones, obviously you're reducing the yield. There's at least 5 standards. This is the percentage. So you got 75% is yield grade 1 and down from there. So what we learned early on, if I had 0.4, I was like a yield grade 2 or 3. But I can improve that with a big ribeye. I'll show you that.
Next slide.
No. We talked about the factors. Here's the formula that they use. So value plus, value minus, and you minus from the ribeye. So when you add all these up, you come to a certain value, and then when you subtract the ribeye, you lower the value. So the bigger your ribeye, the bigger the higher your score number will be, but the lower the value of the actual score number will be, because you're looking to get 1, right? What they do on decimals, they round to the nearest lowest whole number. So if you're 1.8, you'll be yield grade 1. If you're 2.8, you yield grade 2. So you can have an animal that may have higher back fat, but has a bigger ribeye, and so they'll compensate each other. So why is that? To the normal retail customer who's going into a grocery store buying a steak, they don't care. But who does care is the guy who goes into the plant and is buying carcasses. And there's a line of carcasses, and if they're yield graded, and you can say these are all yield grade 1, they're going to be worth more value than these over here that are yield grade 3, where I have to take all this fat. So it's important to me to produce that I am producing, and if I'm a beef producer, that I'm producing animals that I can demonstrate have high yield, because now I can say, that carcass, when you buy a quarter from me, this is how much I'm expecting you're going to get fat. Or a lot of times you sell beef to people and they buy a quarter and they're like, at 90 pounds. I thought I was getting 150 pounds, or whatever it was, right? And so being able to explain that is beautiful, but being able to know that your yield is going to be higher than normal, or that you know what your yield is going to be. There's value in it. So there's value in it to the producer, and there's value in it to the person or the group or industry that's going to be buying products. But it's not really, the retail customer doesn't really care about that. What they're going to care about is the quality of the products. Thank you. All right, and then quality grading, we're going to get through this.
All right.
Quality grading is based on maturity and the marbling. So this is the double wins grades. This is what either the restaurant owner or the diner or the person they're selling meat cares about. There's the three highest values in the grades in the industry are select, choice, and farm. This is we'll see this again, but this chart is great because it tells you if I have 2% IMF, 2.5% IMF, that's my marbling score. And so if I'm 2.5, I'm low select. I'm 5, low choice. So you can look at ultrasound readings and say, okay, what's the background on that animal, or the marbling on that animal? This is how he's going to.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Intramuscular fat.
Intramuscular fat. Yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry. The purpose. I will get into that in the next slide though. If you slide this way, so this is the chart the USDA uses. This is age. So A, B, C, and D, there's the chart over there that shows you that. If you're over 30 months, you're not going to grade prime. We don't have enough data, but I would argue that we believe we have slower growing harvest. So it's possible that we could go beyond 30 months and still have mom.
She has an online
But-
one we could put up
You
there.
know, but not anybody I know has paid
We
for this.
could just run
Can you go
it.
down?
There you go.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Next
So
slide,
these are,
or do you want the same?
those are the 8 grades of quality. So generally, everything I've looked at has been standard or greater. Standard of prime. I haven't seen, if you have coal beef, like bull cows or bull bulls, you're probably going to show up in there. But it's not, that beef is not canning beef, I would argue it. Makes great ground. But from a USDA perspective, if you're over 42 months, you're not going to grade. Or you're over 30 months, you're not going to grade. Okay, thank you. All right, so this is maturity. What's the impact? What happens is as the animal gets older, the fibers between the muscles become stronger and tough. They go stronger, so it becomes a more chewy, sinewy dining experience. So that's why age is important. If it's true that our animals age slower, then it's possible that we could get beyond the 30 months or 42 months. USDA grades them. Characteristics of it, muscle color, bone characteristics, muscle color, and texture. It's a physiological age, not chronological age. Something you got to consider when you do ultrasound, because ultrasound is going to rely on the reported date of birth. And so not something you can look at. And another thing I haven't seen them look at, or I don't see it reported, is PPH ultrasounds. So you're looking at the degree of bone density, color and texture of the ribeye, the shaping conditions of the rib box. And then once again, here's the chart that shows you that's where the maturity is determined by age. Right? All right, so this is going to be the marbling. So I'm a intramuscular fat, intermuscular.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what they're looking at when they're measuring how much IMF there is. Once again, same chart with the 3 grades. The coarse marbling is probably going to be select, medium is choice, and fine is prime. This is the quality grades from USDA, and I believe there's 12. Here is where, this is where you see the Wagyu. So, one of the things we observe is you get here, the meat is really juicy. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
right? So there's a trade-off. Having super high quality graded meat and the quality of the dining experience, if you like all that juice, it's fine, but cutting to a steak and it doesn't have any taste. There's a balance there. Okay, now we'll get into the types of grade, how to do it. Speak well. Okay, ultrasound. So what ultrasound is an implementation of this piezoelectric research that was done in the 1800s, where they found they can convert mechanical energy to electrical energy. And implementations of that shortly after they discovered it was like sonar and radar. Ultrasound, I believe, came along in the 50s, at least this is what I've read. And what they do is they have this, what they call it, a transducer, that transmits a sound wave into the carcass between the 12th and 13th rib. And as it goes in, it sends reflections back. And they collect those reflections. And as the reflections hit different, or as the sound wave goes through different parts of the flesh, its return based on the density of the flesh has different values in amplitude is what it is, in strength. And so what they do then is to convert those into values that are black and gray values. And so what allows the technician to do is see, okay, here's the hide, here's the back fat, here's the muscle, and here's the intramuscular fat. And as those reflections are collected, it forms an image. And so from the image, they're able to look at it and determine, okay, here's how much back fat you have on there, here's the size of the ribeye, and here's your mark. Today, they're supposed to be using 256 shades of gray. The human eye can only see 30 to 64 shades, but computer processing can help us prove those samples. And then you would think, based on what you see in AI and machine learning these days, that we should really that process should really become very, very active. Because there's so much data is being collected that it should be a really useful tool. This shows you what an image looks like. It's in grays, right? So it's not pretty, and you look at it and you go, I probably need a technician to interpret that. But this is the same ribeye here.
Mm.
And then up top, it shows you where these measurements are taken. They also do a rump ultrasound. I haven't seen the rump done in stock show data or in any beef tests that I've looked at. So what we get is the ribeye area, the back fat, and the intramuscular. Is everybody good with these terms now? Intramuscular fat, IMAF, REA, ribeye area per heart. Back fat, KPH. KPH may or may not be important to us because we don't see it in our data, but if we ever really started processing a lot of data, or a lot of animals reporting that carcass data, that might become important to us, but right now it's. Okay, then we just talked about ultrasound. This is hot carcass grading. So this is a grader in the processing facility that's making these metrics, is measuring the back fat. KPH can be measured by the grader looking at the animal and estimating its percentage of fat, or you could actually cut the fat off the carcass and reweigh the carcass, and now you know what the delta is. And then obviously hot carpet weight costs.
Mhm.
So, cool. So we know these terms, how are we gonna use this information and what data do we have that we can use to assess what we're gonna do with it? So there's two data sets that I found. If anybody knows of any more data sets, I'd love to hear about it. I talked to, David Peace from Glen Osprey Klein and talked to my email. And they did a bunch of bull tests back when they were running herds in Canada. But he didn't have any data, so that was stuck out there. I know Grover Hill did bull tests, but I haven't been able to get that data. Eddie promised me and sent me some, but I haven't been able to get that. So if anybody has any data, I would love to look at it and make it available if anybody wants to look at it. So what we do have, national show and sale results. That link right there will take you to the web. They keep changing the website page, but that's pretty current. So what happened is ACA in 2001 started doing ultrasounds on all the bulls that come through stock show. All the data, that data is recorded in the bagpipes. Spring bagpipes have that data. If you have some interest in going to look at it, just get the spring bagpipe for that year. Data that's online is 2012 to 2026. 2017, I could not figure out how to read it. 2021 was COVID. Everything else is there. The problem with this show data that I found is, okay, you click, and then you'll see this when I do the dashboard part, but you click on the link and it brings you spreadsheet. Spreadsheet has everything every animal that was registered for the stock. So whether it was scratched, emails, steers, and bulls. And so you got to filter through that. For me, I was interested in bull data. And so I think the female data could be interesting just from a weight perspective. But generally, for this exercise, I just got rid of it. The other data set I found was these Thor Barton bull tests that went on from 2000 to 2005. Joe Valancourt was Thor Barton Ranch in Wyoming. Had a lot of influence in promoting the quality of the beef, marketing the beef, the Highland beef, that's what I should say. He was after it, and so he ran these bull tests for a few years. You can kind of see that, like the first year there was a lot of participation, and it just kind of rolled off after that. The last test I did not include because it was all Thor Barton animals, and there was a lot of crossbreeding in there. Interesting data, but I was looking, when I was doing the exercise, I was looking for genetics that maybe I could go find in the herd book to use in my herd from animals that had the traits that I was looking for. And it turned out that a lot of them, like I say here, many of the bulls are not in the herd book. They did report Siren Dam. We could go back to the Siren Dam, which is more what I'm interested in than the animal, because I'm convinced with some of these bulls we see, it's a really good bull, but sometimes he's not contributing to the process. And so what I wanted to do was get in front of that and say, what produced that? And then can I find those genetics?
Yeah.
And so, what I found with the data is very interesting data, and it will tell you if you guys do a bull test, these are results you can expect to see over the how many ever days weighing period you did. He did 21 days. And I think there was an initial weigh-in and then 5 or 4 weigh-ins after that. I think that's all I got on that. So what I did was, I went to the ACA website. Now, mind you, I didn't know how to write any code. So I looked at this data for years, and I'll tell you a story. When I first started in the Highland business, I was at stock show. We started in 2004 when I was seized for a while, but came back in 2010, and I was at stock show, and I was going to buy a bull from the stock show. And I was standing there, and Eddie came up to me, Eddie McKay came up to me, we started talking, and I was telling him, yeah, I think I'm gonna buy this bull here. And he was like, what are you gonna buy that bull for? That's a crap bull. I was like, what do you mean it's a crap bull? He just won the banner. He's like, yeah, I don't know, look at this number. And so I was like, what numbers? And so we started talking about it. He said, look, this is important. So that's how I got into it. And so every year I would study these spreadsheets, but I was working, right? So I didn't have time to do other things. So I look at the data and pick the best bull of the year, but I always wanted to compare them across the years and see, is there trends we can find in there and stuff like that. So when I retired, I sat down in last spring. I got all the data off the website. The problem on the website was the data is not in common format. Some of it's PDF, some of it's spreadsheets, some of it's in some web format. You have to read it in and normalize it. So I got that done. I developed these Python scripts to do that. And then I got rid of all the females and scratches and animals without measurements. There are some animals that wound up with no measurements for whatever reason. Maybe they didn't show them or whatever. So now I have a data set that's all bull data. So I was like, cool. What do I do with it? I had sheets of data. So I'd sort it by ribeye area and I'd print spreadsheets out. I showed it to a few people and then just put them away. And so what I realized right away, you can't compare animals that are yearlings to senior bulls. They're completely different. And so the first thing I did was I divided them up by year. I said, okay, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. And so now I had a new book of spreadsheets. And that still didn't make sense. There's too much changes in a year between January and December of 2025 on SUVs. There's a big difference between those. And so I thought about it and I said, that's why they got classes at National Western. Let's do that. So I figured out what's the dates of the divisions at stock show. And then how many days old, so from January 1st to April 3rd is intermediate full pay. And then May 1st to September 1st is junior full pay. So how many days old is that? So I figured that out. Then I said, well, can I figure out how old the bull is? So I needed to get stock show date, the day they went on the scale at stock show. So it's Thursday after Martin Luther King's birthday every year. So now I can figure, now I had how many days old they were, and I could bin them into National Western stock show divisions. Now it's starting to make sense. Now those bulls you're comparing animals with their peers. Still some offsets, but knowing what you're looking at, you can say, okay, this is okay. And that's what. But then still I have a list of animals in the division, and I was like, well, I'm gonna look at market or intramuscular fat. And so I sorted by who's got the highest intramuscular fat on this division, and so I could see it. But then there was no indication of, well, what was this ribeye? So I had to go restore it, and it was still confusing. So what I did was I said, I'm going to come up with a scoring system, and if you guys know more than I do, I'm happy to hear it. But what I used was ribeye area, because that's a performance thing. The animal has grown a ribeye. Ribeye per 100 is definitely a performance thing. Intramuscular fat is a trait that the animal either, I believe, has or doesn't have. I'm not convinced you can feed I am convinced you can feed
Ag fat.
but I'm not convinced that IMF is gonna show up. And the reason I say that is, when I look at the data, I look at some of these animals, and I know what program they came out with, and I'm like, I know how they feed, and this animal does not have IMF. And so why is that? And so I'm convinced it's genetic, completely crazy, but the other thing could be the way our animals age. When you look at some of the trends, you'll see that and it's probably normal across the industry, but IMF increases as the animal has reached its full size, or its near full skeletal structure. That's how I did the scoring. I scored them all by each trait, they're by area, they're by per 100, average daily gain. So I had the weight, measurement date, and the birth date. What I did was I used 50 pounds as a constant for birth weight, because I didn't have reported birth weight. So I used that, and then I just divided it out. So then I knew how many pounds this animal gained per day up till measurement. And then from there, I said, okay, spreadsheets are not working out for me. Let me see if I can find some visualization tool. So I found these dashboards. And so I went and learned that code. I built these dashboards, and then I put in some interactive tools where users can go in and look at the data and sort it any way they want. Look for whatever they want to look for. The question is, when you look at it, can you make any sense of it? And that's kind of what I'm looking for. You know, the data I'm making, this is available to anybody who wants to look at it. I don't. What I'm looking for is feedback. I don't understand this. Can you make it do this? That kind of thing. And I'll be happy to try to help. What I'm suggesting here is this is a prototype. So I'm posting it on a site that allows you to host your dashboard for free. And so it's not a product. And it could go down at any time, and something can happen to me, it goes away. So what I believe I've done is demonstrated that, hey, this data can be usable, and the association may be interested in making this some kind of product for the participants and members of the association, so that it's useful, just like the herd. So I think that's the end of this.
All right,
Perfect.
perfect timing.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Good. Does anyone have any questions or want to make any comments or anything? No.
Stay tuned.
All right, thanks.
All right.
Are you guys looking forward to coming in?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Thank you. But first, make sure you replenish our bodies. Everybody needs to eat, drink some water. So lunch is being served in that same Viking room we had breakfast in. And so you've got an hour, and we'll be back. Okay.
When we come back at one, let the front house know that we need the lights in.
Okay.
And they'll bring them up.
Are these gonna come back up? Okay. Okay. And the front desk upstairs, the front desk up. Okay. You said it was too hot in here? Yeah, okay.
Gotta figure out that signed book. We need to maybe get that and then
Yeah, right.
comment on it. That
Where is it right now?
one of a kind.
There it is.
The bid on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's different things. Yes, we'll find some lunch. Getting hungry.
How's everything with you, Jamie?
He didn't go. So, oh, from Scotland? Yeah. Sick. So I'm like. Yeah. And then I was sick for the next week, like dead on the couch. I wish they-
Sick.
And it hung on for a long, yes. And Randy got it from picking us up. And Stacia got it, and then she had an emergency appendectomy. Yeah. When she got home. Yeah, and right now, last night, she says, pray for me. She's on, did you see that? I saw that. It's like, what is wrong? Oh, no, we read it. It's like, but, yeah, so yeah, but it's just. Yeah, no, that was bad. Yeah, it was.
We just got over it. Well, something like that.
Again, yes, but, and Randy said half of the, is that he had how many guys on his crew?
I don't remember what you said. What you said.
And whether you have contact with them or not, it's there. Yeah. So, yeah, it's just, yeah. But yeah, he says, Mom, I don't need this shit. In fact, yeah,
Every time
Thursday.
he turns around, he's catching them.
Yeah, and was it Thursday? He said he went, when we talked to.
I would have to make
he
them
went
an
on
admin.
Antibiotics. Oh. See, they have a nurse practitioner